Hello and welcome to a Grey Room Studios special. This is Stats Explains, a show where I, Stats, explain something you probably don't even care about. But if you do, I hope you learn something. Anyway, let's get into this. Formula One has introduced new regulations regarding development and budgets. For our big four American sports fans, budgets in those sports are fairly simple with a salary cap. Development is done mainly by contracted companies such as Nike or Wilson, and all teams share in the development. However, in racing, the car is designed and built by the teams, meaning not only is the driver a variable, but the car is as well. Formula One has always been a land of the haves and have-nots. If you drive for Ferrari or Mercedes, you're almost always battling for trophies and titles. If you drive for Minardi or Stats and Fats Racing, you're lucky to only get lapped twice. However, until the past decade or so, reliability was always cutting edge, meaning the best teams could be counted on to have a few races per year where the engine blew or parts broke and gave the midfielders a chance at the win and the backmarkers an opportunity for a great day. With Mercedes' dominance of the past 6 years also seeing maybe one mechanical retirement out of 20 races, it's become increasingly difficult to have those opportunities. So F1 has introduced revolutionary changes to Aero testing regulations. In 2021, teams will be allowed different amounts of wind tunnel tests per week. 2020 champions Mercedes will have just 90% of the 40 allocated runs per week, while Williams, who finished in last, 10th place, will have 112.5%, which means 45 runs. This means your top performers will have less margin for error in their tests, and the lower teams will be able to experiment a little bit more. Then, for 2022, the limitations grow even more. The defending champs will be limited to 70%, just 28 runs per week. Each team then will be bumped by 5%, basically 2 runs each, until the lowest team, who will bump up to 115%, giving them 46 runs. That's 18 more than the champions. But what will this mean for all of the competition? Well, I don't think it means Williams will claw the sometimes 5-second gap they've had to Mercedes back in a year. That's just not realistic. What it does mean, though, for a team like Williams, is that they can experiment a little bit more, something they need to do to find the advantages other teams already have. George Russell has proven he's a feisty racer, and if Williams can deliver him a car capable of fighting for 14th, he'll get it there and a little bit more. For the top teams like Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull, they'll still have their advantages, but will have to be precise and nearly perfect with their use of aero testing time. Then there's the midfield runners, but we'll start with the manufacturers who are stuck there, Renault and Racing Point, which will be Aston Martin from 2021. Renault's return to F1 in the mid-2010s as a constructor has been, well, less than stellar, with no race wins or even a podium to show for it. Renault appear to be in some struggles right now and have become a bit disenchanted with their lack of success amid their return to Formula One. However, they state that they are still interested in staying in and want to try to claw back to the top. But will these regulation changes be enough to keep them involved in the sport and maybe even aid in them clawing back to the main fight? Then there's Racing Point, whose majority owner Lawrence Stroll is quite set on remaining in the sport, especially with his new Aston Martin deal and the investments. For quite some time, many people within the sport have said that this team has some brilliant people who get the most out of their resources. Will a bit of an advantage in aero time be enough for the team to challenge higher up the grid? Then there's McLaren and Haas, who also sit in the midfield as two of the non-manufacturer teams who could benefit from larger advantages as well. McLaren grabbed brilliant results last year with Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. Could that little extra time in the aero testing be enough for them to go from best of the rest to challenging for podiums and maybe even race wins? In 2019, Haas struggled with their car development so much, maybe the extra time could have aided them in a smoother fixing of the car and keeping them from finishing ninth in the championship. One thing that might be overlooked, though, is the second teams. Ironically, the two Alfa teams, Alfa Romeo and Alfa Tauri, are the B teams for Ferrari and Red Bull respectively. How will developments and discoveries from these teams be treated? Surely if Ferrari or Red Bull is supporting the effort of the team, they'll want those extra tips and development time. How will F1 be able to police this, or is it going to become a free-for-all? At the end of the day, I think F1 deserves massive credit for attempting to close the gap among the teams. These changes, in addition to wholesale car changes and budget restrictions, should allow for the gaps between the teams to be tenths instead of full seconds. While we always want F1 to be a meritocracy where innovation and creativity rule, we also want the private and non-manufacturer entries to be able to compete for wins and succeed. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel for all of our crazy content. We also release our podcast every Friday night reviewing the weekend sports. It can be found on Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and wherever you may listen out. This has been Stats Explains, F1's new Aero regulations for 2021.